I'm very proud to be Iranian, and I think that the culture is the true culture, despite what North American media wants to paint it at, is extremely welcoming of all different kinds of religions, people, races, etc. If you go to Iran today, there is thousands of different, cultural dialects and groups and.
You're listening to another episode of Faith Deficit, a weekly program that explores individual stories of faith in an increasingly secular world. So my guest this time is Mana Mansour. She is currently a segment producer and on-air style expert on Canada's #1 daytime series, The Marilyn Denis Show, on CTV. She also lends her fashion expertise to multiple different outlets, including CTV's eTalk and CTV Morning Live. And before she came to Toronto, she was the first ever community reporter for the 24-hour news channel BC1. And she was also the host of Shaw Multicultural Channel, a reporter for the lifestyle program Go Vancouver, and the creator, host, and producer of West Coast Style, Vancouver's premier fashion and beauty series. She's won a Leo Award for Best Writing in an information and lifestyle series, and she's had 3 consecutive nominations for Best Host and Best Production. So she's on the come up. This is Mana Mansour. Thanks so much for being on the program.
Thanks, Josh. What a wonderful introduction. I appreciate it.
Well, I stole a lot of it from your bio. But it's all true. Yeah, it's all true. So, I mean, we've known each other for a little while, and I guess this is a good opportunity to talk a little bit about how you grew up. So did you grow up in a strong kind of faith background?
Actually, no. I'm a little bit of an anomaly, being that I am Iranian. And my family, we moved to Canada when I was just about 2 years old. And so I've grown up my whole life, kind of in this international kind of, I guess you could say family, because my parents have lived kind of all over the world, but both are Iranian. And I was very lucky in the sense that my parents never forced any sort of religious beliefs on my sister and I. We come from a culture and a country that is very Islamic, primarily Islamic, and that was never forced on us. Even though I have relatives and cousins and whatever who do practice the Islamic faith, and that's really a huge part of who they are, and I totally respect that. But my parents never really made us go to mosque or instill that we had to follow that faith at all. They themselves are, I guess you could say, agnostic. They believe in a spiritual higher power, but never, devout in the Islamic faith.
And so for you, did you have a concept of an idea around God or something higher when you were younger, when you were growing up?
I did. I think my parents definitely wanted my sister and I to be spiritual, even though they didn't force, Islam on us. I think they definitely wanted us to believe that there is a power that's bigger than us, and to always be grateful and appreciative of our quote unquote blessings every single day, and to have faith in a way that there is someone or something up there watching over us, and that we should always, try to be good people.
And was that something did that evolve as you kind of became an adolescent, went to university? Do you feel that you became more skeptical of that, or did you never really challenge that in those years? That kind of belief?
Well, to be honest, I have kind of had the same beliefs all throughout my life. When I was younger, I don't think I really fully understood, the scope of spirituality and all of its different facets. But when I grew older and kind of was trying to make my own mind about things, I really did kind of solidify what my parents believe in for myself, which was, there is a higher power that's bigger than us, and we should always be grateful and be a good human, kind of thing. And I've gotten to believe in that more as I grow older. I follow, this is going to sound a little kooky, but I follow, people like Dr. Wayne Dyer's teachings and Deepak Chopra and a lot of these kind of philosophical psychiatrists who really, believe that no matter what religion you are, we are kind of, one in the same, that we all have some kind of higher power, watching over us, and that we is our kind of our life force. And I believe in that. So.
And is that kind of what, because it feels like you've always been a driven person, and I'm wondering if if that's what drives you to be successful.
No, I don't think that my spirituality drives me. I think my spirituality, grounds me in any, if I'm going to be 100% accurate. I think my ambition is more for myself and, for also to make my parents proud, because making them proud is extremely important to me. And,
right.
And also, I do what I do because I'm super passionate about it. And I love making, people's lives better through my journalism work. So honestly, it's not to be like, oh my gosh, I'm doing it for God. It's more so
right.
for, it's more so for myself. And it gives me a lot of joy and confidence. And, that's why I do it.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I think you're, is it fair to say that your Iranian background and your relationship with your parents is something that I don't want to say that it like defines you, but I feel like it's a big part of your identity. But at the same time, like you said, there's aspects of that you don't necessarily follow. Like you're Iranian, but you're not, necessarily Muslim, or you know what I mean? Like so is there sort of something about that you feel kind of, what am I trying to get at? That's sort of a definitional for you, or it's important to you to sort of come back to and remember where you come from?
Absolutely. I think that for me, like being Iranian is more so about the culture, and and I'm kind of the pseudo Iranian in a way, because I'm not, 100% a traditional Iranian either, because I've grown up in Canada, so I'm a hybrid of both cultures. But I'm very proud to be Iranian, and I think that the culture is the true culture, despite what North American media wants to paint it at, is extremely welcoming of all different kinds of religions, people, races, etc. If you go to Iran today, there is thousands of different cultural dialects and groups, and all over the country. There's people of, different faiths. There's people like you can go to the north and someone might look completely different than someone who's in the south. So that's one aspect of the culture I think gets kind of lost in translation in North America, is that it is an extremely diverse makeup of different religious groups as well as different ethnic groups.
Right.
So that's one thing I love about it. It's very welcoming, and the entire culture is all about hospitality and friendship and community building, which I think is has no religion really. That's just being, a great human and loving, your neighbor and your friends, and so
right.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think you're right. We look at you might look at the current government, or you might look at particular highly publicized incidents, and then you paint the entire country with the same brush. But there's also this, incredible intellectual history and history in the arts and history, like you said, with, there's culture, there's aspects of hospitality and kind of a multiplicity of faiths. And so it is unfortunate that we have this like perception that, everyone who lives in this particular region is, a devout religious person who has the same beliefs and acts the same. And like we wouldn't say that about Canada, right? What I mean?
No. And I even have some American friends who feel like they're also getting painted with the same brush as maybe some of the fanatical, people who are Trump supporters or whatever. I have a lot of friends who live in New York, live in Los Angeles, very open-minded, free-thinking people, and they're like, I'm worried what the rest of the world is thinking about me. I don't want them to think that I fall in the same bracket. So it's the same. I think we all over the world, we have there's prejudice against different groups of people that are caused by ignorance and lack of education.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel like your role in the media in some way is helping to mitigate that? I mean, you're a public figure, but I don't know that there's a ton of Iranian, this might be my own ignorance, but folks in the hosts in the media, right? I don't know if that's right or wrong.
You are right. I mean, I think the number one person that comes to mind is Christina Mansour from CNN. She is half Iranian, but was raised in Iran her whole life. She's probably the most famous and accomplished Iranian journalist and on-air personality. But other than her, there's not really anybody. There was a couple here and there. I mean, I please excuse if I don't know about you and you're in a local market and don't have national exposure, but honestly, there's not that many. And as someone who is on a national platform, I feel it's very important to show that, Iranian women are strong and outspoken and creative and just to have the visibility, just like that plain, simple visibility, I think is important because we live in a country that is 52% of ethnic minority. And just look at Stats Canada. It's proven. I'm not making that number up. And, in case anyone's like, what?
Fact checking,
Fact checking. But sometimes our media doesn't reflect that. I mean, certain places are getting better, and I'm not just speaking of broadcast media. I'm also speaking of the media we consume, like fictional dramas and etc. But I feel like it's the responsibility of media to reflect the people that watch it, So, and I'm happy to be maybe that kind of moniker for the Iranian community. It's an honor and a pleasure to, whenever I see an Iranian woman come up to me in the street, recognizing me maybe from one of my appearances and say, I'm so happy an Iranian girl is on TV. So that makes me very, very happy. And, I hope it continues. I hope more fair representation happens in all different kinds of media that we consume.
Yeah. So you've had, people come up to you and specifically identify that.
Yeah. Well, mostly it's Iranian people because they know my last name. It's just like, if you're from that ethnic group, you can identify what the names are. So, they can tell from my, visible makeup who I am and stuff. So yeah, I mean, I usually hear that from fellow people in the Iranian community. So
yeah,
which is very nice.
And I mean, I'm a white male. I'm a straight white male. And when I think about, the work the stuff that I do creatively, if I'm writing or if I'm doing this podcast or something else, I don't think about my need to, I mean, I'm Jewish, so maybe there's that, but I don't generally think about my need to represent anything. I mean, just because there's so much, there's so many of us, right? We inundate media, and there's a lot of socioeconomic reasons for that. And it's not good. I mean, I'm not in favor of it, for the record, but I do feel like it's one of these things where, on the one hand, you hear people say, "Well, I'm representing, I'm trying to represent a positive image, and I'm trying to, let the little girls know that they can do this too, and all that." But at the same time, it's kind of terrible that you are put in a position where you kind of have to. Like, I was speaking to a playwright. She's Indo-Canadian, and she was talking about how sometimes it feels like she can't make a mistake as a writer because she in some way represents a lot of other Indo-Canadian writers. So she becomes that sort of like example, or like how a film a film like Girls Trip, that film has to
Right.
do well, because if that film doesn't do well, they're never going to greenlight another film that has four black female leads. That kind of idea, like, I
Yeah.
feel is really, it's great that, on the one hand, it's really incredible that you can be this positive role model, but it's unfortunate that you are put in the position where you maybe feel like you have to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I don't feel like pressure at all, though, to be honest, to, do my community right, because as I said earlier, like, I feel like I'm part of many different communities, not just the Iranian. Iranian, yes, is a big part of who I am, but I'm also, a Canadian woman, and I'm in those communities as well. So, and luckily for me as a creative person, I'm not in a position where I have to be super serious, I talk about fashion and lifestyle and bettering yourself through your personal style and everything. So I feel like, I can get away with kind of showing all the facets of my personality and my creativity, and people actually want that. And, anytime I post something that's more of my own personal opinion, people get drawn to it more. I get more followers. I get more people messaging me, when you said this, when, I follow you because I love watching what you put on yourself, because I'm also a petite, curvy girl or whatever, you know what I mean? So I feel like whenever I'm being more myself, it's when it works in my favor, for my audience. So, yeah, I mean, I can understand with a playwright, your friend, it's a little bit different, because I think that if depending on the subject matter that she's talking about, if she's speaking about the Indo-Canadian experience, then, that can be a little bit of a more serious tone. And I think the pressure is much more prevalent, I think, in that case, from that community. I have a friend who's also Indo-Canadian. He's a doctor in Vancouver, and he also mentions to me that he feels a lot of pressure from the Indo-Canadian community to be a certain way. And especially, being in the medical field. And, so I can definitely, understand where they're coming from.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't necessarily want to put words in her mouth. I mean, like, I'm sort of paraphrasing the discussion, but I do feel like, there's kind of this does sometimes feel like there's a bit of a double standard, I guess, is what I'm saying. The things that I don't worry about, other people might worry about, I guess, is the point I'm making.
Well, on one hand, we're trying to, show ourselves in a positive light, but we're also sometimes trying to dispel, the, I guess, stereotypes for the other communities.
Right.
So for the Canadian non-Iranian communities, unfortunately, there are some stereotypes. Like I said earlier about the media painting us a different way. There's also, certain social stereotypes that have been created. For example, like, I hate to say it out loud to continue the stereotype, but basically, like, sometimes Iranian women are painted as, sometimes they can be, like, kind of like a princess in a way, or difficult, or despite how beautiful they are, they can, they're vapid, and, that stuff really bothers me. Because it's absolutely incorrect. I mean, we had, so many women, Iranian women have won the Nobel Peace Prize. We had an Iranian astronaut just go to space who accepted the Academy Award for Best Foreign Film last year. It just makes me livid, with these types of stereotypes, because, and I'm sure, in the Jewish community, there's those stereotypes too for the women. And I think that it's just, that's the things I'm also trying to dispel for the non-Iranian people.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I don't want to harp on it too much. I just think it's kind of interesting. And so, I mean, one of the things I'm sort of exploring with this podcast, I guess, is the idea of how faith is something that, especially in like a secular context, we don't really talk too much about what we believe. Like, I don't know that you and I have ever sat down and talked about our respective beliefs. I don't think so.
No.
So it's, and do you find that to be the case? And do you feel like there's a difference between like different groups of friends or family, or do you feel like generally it's just not spoken about in polite company kind of thing?
I definitely think in this day and age where, we have to be very politically correct and people are very mindful of not being hurtful or, judgmental of anybody, just in the climate that we're living in. I think less and less people are having open dialogues about their beliefs because it is can be a touchy subject for a lot of people. I think that as long as, you're in a respectful space, I think discussions like this can be very beneficial to people. I have a friend in Vancouver who is a yoga instructor and an extremely spiritual person and follows a lot of the teachings of Buddhism. And he loves speaking about spirituality. He's constantly reading and educating himself on different theories and books about spiritual practices. And we have conversations that last hours about it. And it's because he is so comfortable about speaking about the area. And he's a constant learner and wants to share his findings with his friends. I have gotten so many amazing lessons from our conversations, even though I wouldn't really consider myself Buddhist or, someone who's like following those types of teachings. I always get something valuable from those talks. And he's never been preachy to me, like, you have to follow this, you have to read this book. He's all like, hey, I read this book and like, I've been really practicing this and it's been really helpful for me. It's kind of like where it starts.
I feel like Vancouver is kind of the mecca for hybrid spirituality. Like,
I agree.
When I was in Vancouver, I took on so many different belief systems. I was like, a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Yeah. I think that's good though, in a way. I mean, just, there's so many different channels of thought and, different, people who are, talking about really innovative, practices that you don't have to be, necessarily the most devout person in that, say it's Buddhism or whatever, to follow those. You can take little like tidbits from each one of those kind of channels of thought and apply it to your life in a way that works for you.
Yeah.
So
I like that you said
beneficial.
Buddhism. When you said Buddhism, it made me think, because I think it's like
Buddhism,
a combination.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, but it's funny because there's a lot of Jews who end up becoming Buddhist. Like, I think Leonard Cohen is a pretty famous example. There's this weird crossover. Yeah.
Sorry,
so I think
Buddhism. I'm still drinking my coffee.
No, but it's an interesting Freudian slip. Like, it does happen a lot. Like, I've thought about, I'm culturally Jewish, but I've thought about Buddhist practice and I've often been really interested in like exploring that, and I've read, a fair amount around particularly like Taoism and some of the writings about the Buddha and everything. So I don't know, like and even reading stuff like Steppenwolf and like work by, anyway, like some of the stuff that happened in the 70s, like Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. There was that big kind of movement around more general spirituality, Zen spirituality. And I feel like you saw from that movement, you saw a lot of stuff happening in the West where people were more open to cultivating their own personal beliefs. You know what I mean?
Totally. And I think that conversation got kind of halted, and maybe in the last 10 years it's started to fizzle up again. I think the more accepting our society becomes of different cultures, race, sexual preferences, etc., I think those conversations can start happening again. Yeah.
So then one other kind of thing I've been thinking about is with we have like a culture where I think religion is becoming less practiced, and our culture is a little more secular maybe than it was even 50 years ago, let's say, right? More people tend to identify as agnostic or atheist. A lot of people tend to be lapsed whatevers, right? Whatever their background was, they tend to lapse. And I'm wondering if that has led to us trying to establish new communities, like where there was a time, particularly in smaller communities, where like the church was the center of activity, or let's say the synagogue was the center of activity. That's where you met your friends and your future partner and your
Yeah.
family went and everything else. And that still happens a lot of places in the world, but there's also a lot of places, I think, particularly in the West, where we don't have that central place to meet. And we might be, and one thing I think about and I wonder about is if we're losing some of that access to a community, or we're trying to
Yeah.
establish new communities because we don't have that anymore in the same way we used
Yeah.
to.
No, I definitely can see that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think technology has a huge part to do with it. I think also the access to easy travel has a lot to do with that. A lot of people don't live in the same city that they grew up in.
Right.
So, oftentimes you go to church with your parents and then you end up going to that same church or synagogue or whatever it is. And, but then if you move to a completely different country or city, you kind of lose all those ties.
Mm.
Yeah. And I also think that, people are very dependent on technology, like in their day-to-day life, and they don't need, like, because oftentimes, like, the church was not only a place of worship, but a place to find out about news, what's happening in the community. Oh, so-and-so's getting married, now we have Facebook to do all of that for us, and,
Yeah.
and also that's where they would post, bulletins about events and things that were happening in the town. And again, we have technology for all of that. So
We
I
do,
think that,
but I mean, like, is Facebook really like a like?
no,
Is it the
I mean, those were just like examples, but
no? But I mean, it's true. Like, I think that's how we perceive it. We're like, well, I don't need to interface on a personal level with people because I
yeah,
have Facebook or have social
yeah,
media. Like, we can
yeah,
Snapchat each other, so we're good. But I don't know
yeah,
that you're really able to get into it. Like, I'm terrified of not terrified, but like I don't think it's a good use of energy for the most part to have too many like long political debates on Facebook. Like, I do have an
I
opinion,
agree.
but
Yeah.
I feel like if I want to talk to someone, I'd much rather like get into it with them, have a conversation, be wrong, or learn something, or present something, or
Hmm.
go back and forth on ideas and see and have that kind of dialogue rather than like
Yeah.
I think this and there's no nuance to it. It's just, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. And oftentimes people hide behind the screen. So they say something, that can be quite hurtful and prejudiced. And then there's no repercussions because they're anonymous on
right,
on the internet. And that doesn't solve anything. And that actually, it just makes things worse. You can't
right,
have an open dialogue when somebody is just being an internet troll.
yeah,
But, places like Facebook and blogs and whatever, they offer that kind of environment to breed those kinds of behavior. So,
hmm,
I mean, when you're facing the person, you can't scream a predatory comment as easily than when you're
no,
hiding behind a fake username and a screen.
right,
So,
right.
yeah, so maybe in a way, those platforms have, kind of made us susceptible to prejudice in a way that
Hmm,
we hadn't had before.
hmm, yeah. I wonder. I
Like,
mean,
just look at any of these posts the last couple of days with the Women's March.
hmm,
Yes, it's been amazing, people sharing, all of the images from the different marches around the world. But for, the 100, positive comments, there are the trolls that prey on those posts and say
hmm.
horrible, derogatory things. So, I mean, would they be so brave enough to show up at that march and say it to the person's face? I don't know.
I mean, I think the answer is no because they clearly didn't.
Yeah.
I think they
Exactly.
had the
I mean, there
opportunity
were
to.
some people. There were some people who did show up with some signs that were
Right.
not so great. But I don't think the tone would have been the same if they were facing that person
Yeah,
that they were targeting.
it's also kind of the there's a term and I can't remember what it is right now, but a false equivalency where if there's people online writing all kinds of comments, you're like, oh, that's a lot of people, that must
Yeah,
represent a huge community of people, and then you actually
exactly.
go to the march and you're like, oh, it's those 5 people with signs
Exactly.
looking uncomfortable. Like it's just such a, you're like, oh, okay, that's what we're dealing with. But I think, like you said, with an anonymous identity, you can be anyone. And we saw that happen a lot with the U.S. election, where there was like clearly there were folks in Russia who were creating fake aliases and being like Midwestern housewives and writing on posts and creating a fake discussion that didn't exist. It was all fake. And I wonder if like, so without having that kind of ability to have real interpersonal dialogue and respectful discussion, you lose a sense of scale and a scope of like what's really happening.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. So I think the other thing that I'm kind of interested in is sort of the idea of what kind of keeps you grounded. Like, well, how do you get out of bed in the morning and go to work the crazy hours you work? Because I know you work crazy hours.
Well, let's see. My 3 alarm clocks.
Yeah.
Lots of coffee.
Okay.
Keeps me grounded. I think being an educated person keeps me grounded. As much as I love talking about what I'm so passionate about, which is personal style and bettering your life and, lifestyle tips and tricks, all the things we talk about on the show I work on. I also like to keep up with the news. I like to be informed about what's happening in the world. I don't just read North American outlets. I try to read the BBC and other outlets, Al Jazeera and stuff, to know what's happening in the world and to understand that there are so many people in this world who would kill just to be able to wake up without an air raid going off. You know what I mean? Or, they're the fear of not having to be bombed every day, So that, especially also because I do come from the Middle East, I think hearing stories of what my parents have gone through, what my relatives have gone through, and constantly reminding myself, of those stories helps me be grounded and grateful of my situation here in Canada. I just try to be a very empathetic person and try to be educated. And I also try to be grateful. I just, received the gift of the 5-minute journal, and I had been journaling a little bit before, but now I'm really keen to make it a daily practice of just writing a few things of what I'm grateful for, because I think that really definitely keeps you grounded and doesn't allow you to mull and basically what's the word I'm looking for? Create a demon in your mind about little things that, are happening in your life that end up being kind of not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. So I don't know. I think those are, I mean, I read somewhere, I forgot what article, it might have been McLean's, but I read an article about how anxiety is like a huge problem right now. Like people getting actual anxiety disorders and anxiety attacks like the never before. Maybe people are more, I guess you could say, educated on the symptoms. So maybe they're talking about it a little bit more so than they were previously. But just basically the amount of people that are going on anti-anxiety medication has really increased in the last few years. This is what the article was saying. And I read it and I was like, oh my gosh, wow. And it's kind of alarming reading that, because you would think in this day and age, especially in the country we live in, you would think people they have it much easier than our forefathers who were, hunting and salvaging the land for food and didn't know, where the electricity was coming from and et cetera.
Right.
But you think now in this day and age, things are so easy, but no, it's like there's more, people on anxiety medication than ever before. So I read that and I was like, wow, that's really scary. So I don't know, as a community, we can kind of band together and figure out a way to kind of, maybe we can teach this in schools, I'm not sure, but to ways of taking teachings from, Buddhism and these different religions that are about meditation and being thankful and being in a state of Zen. I'm not sure we can maybe this is the time we do need those teachings more so than ever before,
Yeah.
So
I think there's something there. I mean, I think that there's also some research around the impact, and when they talk about the use of antidepressants and drugs, and I've used antidepressants, I mean, on sort of focused periods of time when I felt like I needed them. But I have to say that the stuff that got me through my darker times was, going to therapy and exercise and socializing and finding mental tools to identify feelings that I had and breaking out of destructive patterns and all that stuff. That was much more valuable to me than the evening out that I might have gotten from a drug, because it didn't address any of the underlying root causes of the anxieties that I was feeling. And I think that there's something, what I'm kind of interested in now is the idea of going beyond the mechanics of, I guess, let's say mental health mechanics of stuff like cognitive behavioral therapy, and looking at, is there something deeper? Is there something in my case, like faith, some kind of faith that you can kind of dig into, and can give you that sort of confidence? And do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And going back to my friend in Vancouver, the spiritual one, the yoga teacher, he also battled depression quite severely in his early 20s. And it was really meditation and yoga, like exercise. And he was on medication for a while, but he said that what really helped him was practicing those kind of spiritual practices, daily rituals that really, changed his way of thinking. So, I mean, and those are rooted in Buddhism and Hinduism, right? So it's interesting.
Yeah. I don't have too many other questions. I mean, the only other sort of thing I was wondering about was the fashion side. Is there something?
No.
I mean, what would? No. But I don't. Believe me, I don't know anything. But what would be like? Is there something about what is it about fashion that you dig? Like, what's the thing about fashion that, like, and lifestyle that really? What's your pitch? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I believe that clothing, fashion, beauty have an amazing ability to change your mood, your confidence, and it's very accessible if you want it to be, and it's a very easy way to kind of change your outlook on yourself. Yes, some people may argue it's superficial, but think about when you put on your most favorite jacket or your most favorite dress, the feelings that you get. Or when you finally get a chance to put on something that actually fits your body rather than something that's maybe not right for your body, or, is too tight or too oversized or whatever. You automatically have a change of mood. And so if I can teach those tricks to women and men, maybe in a small way, I can get them to start their day a little bit better. And then all the other stuff kind of is up to them. But if I can help in any way, that makes me feel really good. And I love doing it. I love doing that for them. I also believe that, fashion is an amazing way to kind of show off your creativity, represent different aspects of yourself that you want to show. It's, I just think it's a really fun way to kind of start a conversation, So, those are some of the reasons why I love doing what I do. But I mean, one thing I love about Lifestyle TV is every single day we teach you something to make your life better, because there's so much bad news out there in media, and that news is important to know. It's important to know what's happening in your community. It's important to know the world news of the day. But if we can help you with all that noise going on to help you just to get, oh, you know what? I can make this really healthy meal for my family. Oh, wow. I didn't know that for under $100, I can, make my bathroom look nicer. Just these little things to help you just make your day better, I think is important to know, and it just changes your mood. It changes, helps you with your family, it helps you with your daily life. And, and that I like being part of that conversation. So.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, that's but thank you so much for your time, Mana. It's always really great to catch up with you. And yeah.
Ditto, Josh. Thank you for having me. I hope I made sense.
You did. You did. It was great.
Okay, cool.
I generally don't make sense and generally don't know what I'm talking about. So I just rely on someone else to I just throw something out there and then I go, does that make sense to you? And they're like, I'm going to try to make something out of what you just said.
Well, thank you for having this conversation with me. It's been a pleasure. So thanks.
Thank you for listening. You can find our website at faithdeficit.com. Faith Deficit's recorded and produced in Guelph, Ontario at Domo Studios. Music by Jeremy Volz. You can hear more of his music at jeremyvolz.com. If you've been enlightened by this week's episode of Faith Deficit, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and provide an iTunes review. You can also support the program on Patreon, and if you do, thanks so much. I'm Josh Bowman, and this is Faith Deficit.